Okay. So today we're talking about Neil and Charlie. Just let's get start with where they were born,
Okay.
when they were born.
My mother was born October the 11th, 1911. Her name was her name was Elizabeth Neal Lassiter Wilson later when she married my dad. And as a child, I have some pictures of her in first grade, times like that. She was called Lizzie Neal, which I think is terrible. But later on, it was just Neal. Her name was Neal Wilson. She was the next to the youngest of 8 children. She had a younger sister. She had 2 brothers, Max and Kenneth, and then she had 5 sisters. And as I had said before, the 2 brothers died, they lived a good life in their 70s. All the women, the sisters, lived long lives up to Dot being 104 when she died. Mother went to school in Rochelle, Georgia, both grammar school and high school. Then, as the other girls in her family, she went to Tift College in Forsyth, Georgia. She did not finish. She wanted to go to the University of Georgia, and I'm unsure as to whether there wasn't enough money to send her or whether they didn't approve of it, but Mother dropped out and didn't finish college. She came to Atlanta and worked for the Federal Reserve Bank. She lived with one of her sisters. I'm not sure which one, I can't remember, but she did live with one. It might have been her brother Kenneth who was here, but there were several of them here in Atlanta, and she lived with them, and she worked for the Federal Reserve Bank. My daddy, Charles Edgar Wilson Jr., was born in Atlanta, lived here all of his life, except for the years that he was in the Navy when he was stationed at Great Lakes Naval Station in Illinois. And I do remember as a small child living at Great Lakes, right outside Chicago, not far from Chicago, and going into Chicago on the train, things like that. But he was in the tire business. He started out working for the Firestone Tire Company. He was a manager of 2 different, I know when I was born in 1941, he was manager of the Firestone store in Decatur, and that's why they were living in Decatur, and I was born in Decatur, Georgia. They lived, I wasn't born, I was born in Atlanta. But then after that, he managed the Firestone station in West End, which is still there, by the way. And then after the Second World War, he came back and went with General Tire. And I can't remember at what age I was when he bought into a dealership at that time it was called Pruitt Bradford Tire Company. It was later on just Bradford Tire Company. Mr. Pruitt retired, but Daddy was one of the owners of it, and he stayed in business. Even when Brad had a stroke and retired, Daddy kept the business going. And when Daddy got sick, he sold out to Gordy Tire Company. We were living in New Jersey at that time, and I'm not exactly sure which year that was, but he retired, and then Mother was 96 when she died, 96 and a half. Daddy was 80 when he died. Both of them buried in Atlanta at Arlington Cemetery. I have one brother named Charles Edgar Wilson III. And he, by the way, has a son named Charles Edgar Wilson IV. So the name is continued from my grandfather to my father, brother, and now his son, our nephew. My brother Chuck is 5.5 years younger than I am. Born in 1947. I was born in 1941, did I say that? September the 9th, 1941. He was born March 7th, 1947, so he's 5.5 years younger than I am. He is an attorney and a partner in a big law firm in Atlanta, and married and has 2 children. My husband Mitch and I were married June 23rd, 1963. 62, excuse me, and we have 2 children. Alan, the oldest, born June 23rd, 1963, and Charles Andrew, born July 17th, 1970, and 4 grandchildren. Okay, what else would you like?
How did Neil and Charlie meet?
Oh, that's an interesting story. When my daddy, before he went into the tire business, worked for Trust Company Bank, which is now SunTrust. And first of all, he did go to, he being a native Atlantan, he went to, he used to call it Joe Brown. I'm not sure if it was a grammar school or exactly a junior high, but Brown now went on to be a high school. It is now still in existence as a junior high school. It's a beautiful building in the West End part of Atlanta. He then went to Georgia Tech, but he finished his degree in commerce at what is now Georgia State, which was called the Atlanta Division of the University of Georgia. He went with SunTrust, with Trust Company Bank. My mother was with the Federal Reserve Bank, and according to the story I've always heard, at the end of the day, Daddy would take the receipts from SunTrust, Trust Company Bank, over to the Federal Reserve Bank, and Mother was a teller, and that's how they met. When she would take the money from him, and I'm sure count it and do whatever they had to do, and that's how they met. They were married I always thought it was 1936. At some point I heard 38. I'm not sure which it is. They were married on Christmas Day, December 25th. They were married at Druid Hills Baptist Church. And the reason they were married Christmas Day is because that was the only day Daddy had. He had a job, it was the Depression, and it was the only day that he had off. So they were married that day. And every year, even though it was Christmas Day and all of the festivities, Daddy always remembered the anniversary. In some way they celebrated it in their own, special way, whatever, cards, whatever, flowers. So.
What did Charlie do during World War II? You talked about Illinois.
I do not know. I have pictures of him. One of his mates fellows that he was with in World War II. Really he went in as the war was ending. So he was never shipped out anywhere. He spent all of the time at the naval base there at Great Lakes. One of his mates was Denny Galehouse, who was a pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. And I had pictures of Daddy and Denny Galehouse together. He later on became a scout. I don't think he ever was a really great pitcher, but he was a scout, and they used to come to Atlanta, and they would always exchange Christmas cards with Mother and Daddy, and when they would come to Atlanta, they would always stay, get together, and they did stay with us sometimes when they would come to Atlanta. And at one time, we went to visit them, and I have a memory of us coming back through, they lived I'm not sure they lived in Boston, but they lived somewhere in the Northeast, and coming back through, we ran into a snowstorm, and we ended up in Chattanooga. And there was only one room, I guess, in the whole city, and I remember all of us bunked in one bed in Chattanooga, Tennessee. For some reason, I have that memory, and I couldn't have been very old when it happened. But I don't know what exactly he did, but he was not a commissioned officer.
Do you have any stories of their childhood? For example, I remember you said Neil would only eat the center of a watermelon.
Oh, of course. Being farmers, being from South Georgia, you would only eat the red part of the very center of a watermelon, and all that others you just threw away. I think that it was a happy childhood as far as I knew. I'm sure being towards the end of, of 8 children, there was one time one of her sisters, we saw a picture of one of her older sisters with a bow in her hair, and Mama said, I never had a bow. So I guess that there were some things that maybe she missed out on. That, but Daddy, I know Daddy had one brother, an older brother, Frank Burchell Wilson, and they stayed close. He predeceased Daddy, but they stayed close. He was at Georgia Tech. He was a commander in the Navy and finished his naval career, and then went as a purchasing agent with Georgia Tech. So, but they had 2 daughters, and one was my brother Chuck's age, and one was my age, and we always had a wonderful time together, spending nights back and forth with each other, or at my grandmother's and granddaddy's house. So,
Do you know anything about their first home?
I'm not sure about their first home. I was born on what, Mitch? I've gone.
I'm not going blank too. Indicator.
Indicator.
Right at the traffic light.
And we've got a picture of it, of Mother standing out in front of it. It's considered my first home, but I'm not sure where their first home was. I would imagine an apartment somewhere. One of Mother's longest friends, in fact, Mother lived with Audrey Hensley before she and Daddy were married. And Audrey Hensley lived with her mother, and lived with them. The three of them lived together. And Audrey is still alive and well into her 90s. And sometimes she's a source for me to go back and ask questions like that. Audrey will know things like that, but I don't remember. It was several years after they married, before I was born. And it could be that they were living in Decatur the whole time. I just don't know.
And then you know the address on Orlando Street.
I know the house on Orlando Street. I don't know the address
Okay.
that we lived in, and that's where my brother was a baby when we lived there. In fact, I think he was probably born while we lived on Orlando Street in West End. And then we needed a bigger house, and that's when Mother and Daddy built on the first house on North Stratford. So, what else?
Well, then they sold it, moved into the apartments, and then they built a second house.
Yeah, we lived twice on North Stratford,
Oh.
and lots of changes going on that street now as the houses are. We were the first generation. They were new houses, and then they went through a change when there were lots of children on the street, and then like my mother and daddy, they aged, and now there's a whole new block of people who are renovating or redoing the houses or tearing them down and building big mansions there. But it's a lovely, lovely street behind Phipps Plaza.
3812 was your second house. I don't
Yes,
remember.
3776 was the first house, and 3812 was the second house, right down the street from the first one. What else?
What did they like to do on the weekends?
Well, for years, Daddy had a boat. Daddy golfed, and my brother golfs. For years we had a boat. First at Lake Allatoona, and then later at Lanier. We had the first boat with Brad. Daddy and Brad had it together, and that was on Allatoona. And this was before Lake Lanier was ever built or flooded. And I remember when they started flooding Lanier, and you could still see the farms and the homes and the barns and whatever. And of course now it is, I think, the biggest inland lake, or used it, by the most people of any in the United States, something like that. There's something about the Corps of Engineers, and it is a big power source for the city of Atlanta. But I never really enjoyed Lake Lanier as much as I did Allatoona. But we went every weekend. We took people up and Daddy taught them how to ski. He was very patient. And we'd circle the boat back around and pick them up and try again. All my friends, and I'm sure all Chuck's friends too later on. But those were good weekends. And we would always stop and pick up fried chicken or something on the way home, so that when we got home we would have something to eat on the weekends. Any more questions?
What kind of vacations did they take?
It's interesting because we're doing this now in St. Augustine. We always, as a family, vacationed at Ormond Beach or Daytona at that time. And started vacationing there when Eleanor Village was a brand new place. And I just had wonderful, wonderful times in Florida. I do remember as a very small child, my Uncle Frank, being a Navy commander, was stationed at Jacksonville, and we spent time in Jacksonville in the summertime, sometime with them and with my cousin Julianne, that was my age, and we had always had a good time. Mother and Daddy didn't travel a lot. They had some nice trips, but as a family, what we did, we went to see forts. That was Chuck's thing, my brother's thing. So I know I visited every Confederate fort, every, pre-USA fort, the British forts, the American forts, whatever. We visited them all, visited them all. But Mother and Daddy always worked very hard, and later on, owning his own business, he had very little time off. Bad things would happen whenever he tried to go out of town, and something would happen that would cut it short, and we'd have to come back. So that was one of the reasons for the boat, that he could get away for a weekend. But it was hard for him to get away and leave his own business. So we pretty much stayed close to home, maybe a trip to Florida or something like that.
What would you guys do on the holidays? Do you have any holiday traditions?
It was always family, and sometimes it would be Mother's side of the family. Sometimes Thanksgiving was usually Daddy's side of the family. Inez and Joe Birchall, my grandmother and granddaddy, and I had my grandmothers, Louise, Blunt, Birchall, Wilson. I have her dining room table and chairs and the two serving pieces that went with it in my dining room now. And I had pictures as a child of all of us. It has 3 leaves that go in it, and I had pictures of as a child of all of us sitting around the table, the same table in my grandmother and granddaddy's house out in West End on Cascade Road. And that brings back good memories of just family get-togethers. My cousins and I played together. We always look forward to either visiting back and forth. Sometimes they'd come to Atlanta. Sometimes we'd go to South Georgia. Sometimes we'd go to Decatur to Inez and Joe's. Sometimes to West End to my grandmother and granddaddy's. But I don't remember Christmas trips as far as being gone for the whole time. I just remember maybe the day trip, getting up early, driving somewhere for the Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner.
Did they do a world tour?
No, they did not. Like I said, they really didn't travel a lot. Mother always wanted to go to London. She never had a chance to go to London. They did a Canadian trip. They did a trip, a North Cape trip, which would be Norway and the fjords. They did a cruise up there because some of their good friends, Willie and Ruth Cox, had done it a number of times and talked about how much they enjoyed it. Mother and Daddy did that, and I think that was probably the trip that meant the most to them, and we have some wonderful pictures of them. They were, they were both healthy and looked good, and But they did not travel a lot, and I'm sorry that they couldn't, because they would have enjoyed it.
Okay, so let's do this.
Before you do that, you probably need to talk about Charlie's Alzheimer's. Because
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether you want to get into that or not.
Well, sure.
Well, unfortunately, there is a line of Alzheimer's in our family. My grandmother, Louise Wilson, died of Alzheimer's, and she had two sons that lived, my dad and his brother Frank, that I have talked about. There was a third son born. He is buried with my grandmother and granddaddy at Westview Cemetery here in Atlanta. But he only lived like 3 days. I don't know that he was ever named. It just says Baby Boy Wilson. But of the two boys that lived, my daddy and Frank, both of them died of Alzheimer's. So there is some genetic trace there. It will be interesting to see as they continue to study Alzheimer's, whether it goes on down. But my grandmother and my daddy and his brother, all three had Alzheimer's. And Daddy sold his business, Bradford Tire Company, when he began to get sick. And then he lived, because he was a very healthy man, he lived probably another 15 years until he did die of, it's hard to say someone dies of Alzheimer's. They maybe have a stroke or whatever, but he did. It was very sad because he was still very healthy. So.
The official was pneumonia, as I remember.
Something like that. And Mother, of course, just died of old age. She just gave out at 96. She did have the trace of heart disease that runs all the way through the family, from her father through many of her brothers and sisters. But and sure, at some point her heart did stop, but I don't know what the actual cause was. She was 96 and a half. And she was one of the youngest of the girls, of the Lassiter girls, really the Sutton girls to die.
Well, you want to talk about your genetic inheritance of good high cholesterol.
Oh, well, yeah, I do have, we do have good high cholesterol. So hopefully that will be passed down. That's one of the good things. And one of my doctors said one of the highest he's ever seen. So.
I have your blood pressure and his cholesterol.
Oh, too bad. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to switch it. And,
Yeah.
I was
Enough.
going to see if you had any impressions of just that you want to share of Neil and Charlie.
Oh, okay.
Like things that you so you met them later, obviously. Okay.
All right. One of the things I do remember about Charlie was that in his business, his insurance always ran out on December the 31st. And every Christmas season, I remember Charlie sitting on the phone at the desk in the den, talking to insurance agents, trying to get coverage for his business, because it was a business that had lots of opportunities for insurance requirements, because he had people driving large trucks, large tires, recapping tires, just all the dangerous things that could go on in a tire shop. And I do remember him on the telephone all the time. He tried to teach me to ski. I could do well on 2 skis. I could get up on 2 skis and drop one and ski all I wanted to, but I could not get up on a slalom ski. I just could not do it no matter what. And he tried, and your mother tried a number of times to get me to do it, and I just never could do it. Remember one time we were up on Allatoona, no, it was Lanier. Yeah, I never went to Allatoona with y'all. It was up on Lanier, and Charlie had anchored the boat while we were doing something, and I don't remember what it was, and the anchor got caught in a bunch of trees. And so being a college kid and thinking I'm invulnerable, I decided I'm gonna go down and get the anchor loose. Well, I dove off the bow of the boat and I went down and I went down and I went down. And I found the anchor twisted around a bunch of trees that were still there from the filling of Lake Lanier. And that anchor was not gonna come loose no matter what I did. So finally we just had to cut the rope and he had to get a new one. I remember lots about visiting Charlie at the nursing home. We would go out there I would go out probably 3 times a week. And we would stop by the Varsity and get a frosted orange. Charlie loved frosted oranges. And we would sit there and we would feed him frosted oranges. And he was just, he had no idea who we were, but he remembered that frosted orange and he loved it. Charlie really never, I don't think probably the last 10 years of his life really knew who we were. I don't think he remembered from minute to minute even that we were there. But, he was just cordial, and he managed to hide his Alzheimer's for a long time because Charlie was not a geek. He was a people person. And he could talk to anybody about anything. So he could hide the fact that he didn't know anybody's name by just, clapping them on the back. Hey, how you doing? It's been a while, long time since I've seen you, that kind of thing. Neil, when she was at Lynbrook, I can remember going to see Neil, and one of the funny things that I remember about that was that when she was in her apartment, she fell and was lying on the floor and couldn't get up. And the next day when I guess it was one of the aides or one of the nurses, came and knocked on her door, and she told her to come in, and there she was on the floor. And the nurse said, "Ms. Wilson, what are you doing down there?" She says, "Well, I'm down here shooting craps." So she was a card sometimes. A lot of times she was angry. A lot of times she was, disturbed. Just, Neil was a different kind of individual. Charlie was happy-go-lucky all the time. He was a nurturer in their family. Neil was not, but as Faustine says, she was a great cook. I can remember going over there to their house and doing maintenance. I put in a self-cleaning oven for them. I put in shelves in Chuck's bedroom that are still there, by the way, last time we went through it. I don't know, just, I enjoyed being with them, but that's about all the memories that I really have of them.
What about the first time you guys met?
Well, your mother and I met on a blind date for homecoming in 1958. She was dating a guy from Macon who had gone home for the weekend, and one of her friends, who was dating a fraternity brother of mine, asked her if she wanted to go to homecoming. So we had a date on Thursday night and on Friday night and on Saturday night for the weekend. She says she didn't like me, which I understand, but I was a mechanical engineer, so I was working on the wreck, the Rambling Wreck. Got up Thursday morning, worked all Thursday night working on the wreck, worked all Friday night working on the wreck, didn't get any sleep for more than 72 hours. Had 3 dates with her during that period of time. I don't know what I did during that period of time. I don't remember. I do remember that one of my fraternity brothers, actually never became a fraternity brother, he was a pledge, Robert Edward Lee, had a flip-top 1958 Ford flip-top convertible. And he and Jimmy Clark and I would triple date in car. And Robert E. was the nicest guy because he would take us all the way from Tech out to North Stratford Road to drop off Betty and Faustine, then drive us all the way back to Tech before he went home to either Norcross or Alpharetta. I don't remember where he was. But if it hadn't been for him, we never would have gotten together because he had the only car. We're allowed to have cars on campus at that time. I met Neil and Charlie probably, must have been around Thanksgiving, 58. I remember I gave your mother a cashmere sweater for Christmas, 1958, and her mother was horrified that I would give her something so personal as well. Anyway, she looked beautiful in it. So that's when I met him, I guess.
Can I follow up with some questions?
I would just say this about Daddy, Charlie. Growing up in Atlanta, living here all of his life, except for a Navy career, a short time in the Navy, he knew everybody. Atlanta was that size at that time. He knew everybody. And it was really interesting to see him out and about. Everybody knew him. He held our family together. He was a very strong man in his own way, gentle way. But he was the one that held everything together. He kept the car in the middle of the road and the wheels on the ground. And I will say that about him. It was very sad that he developed the illness because he was a very good man. And as you can tell when I talk about him, I was a daddy's girl. And we had a very special relationship, as I think my brother and Daddy had. But the way my brother Chuck talks about him, I think about him every day. It was very hard. It's been very hard to lose him. And at what I considered a young age and as a healthy man.
Do you have any stories of either Rotary or church?
Well, Daddy was a 50-year, and I've forgotten the name of the honorary award, the award you get for 50 years of perfect attendance at Rotary, and he got it, and there was a plaque, and I don't know where the plaque is. I took him, he was sick by then, he had the Alzheimer's. I took him out, he was a member of Decatur Rotary Club, and his membership stayed there all of his life. He never moved it to another group, Buckhead or Atlanta or anything like that. It was all with his Decatur Rotary Club. It met in the hotel in Decatur, which is now an office building. But I took him out there for lunch, and they honored him and gave him the plaque. I don't think it registered with him what was going on. He was, like I said, sick by then and in a nursing home. But it means something to us. But everywhere he went to a Rotary meeting. He would come to see us when we were living in New Jersey, and the first thing he would do is find out where a Rotary meeting was, and I would take him to a town near Summit that had a Rotary meeting, and then I would drop him off, and then I would come back and pick him up when the meeting was over. And that way he had 50 years, probably plus, of perfect attendance, and there is an award that they give for that in Rotary. He was a deacon in Second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church. He was raised a Methodist, and the church he was raised in, West End Methodist, is still there. I think it has changed names now, but we go by it sometimes. And I did not mention earlier that my grandmother and granddaddy's house on Cascade is now a shopping center or something. It's a very, very busy road, but the church is still there and it's thriving. It's a big church, but I do think it's changed, but it's still a Methodist church. When he and Mother married, he joined the Baptist church, and at some point as a child, and I don't know how old I was, we joined Second Ponce de Leon Baptist, or they did, and then later on I joined when I was 9 years old. And he was very active. He was active in his Sunday school class, which was called Triple E. And it was the big men's class in the church. And energetic something endeavors is, I can't remember what the middle E was for, but they were very active class. They did lots of good, and they had many good projects that they supported the children's home, things like that. So he was a deacon. I don't know how many years he served, how many terms. It's usually a 3-year term. I don't know how many terms. You usually go on for 3 years, then you're off for a couple and go back on. So it meant a lot to him, and the people were good to him that were in his Sunday school class. They kept up with him after he was too ill to go to church, so they understood. And so any other?
I heard the story that he sold all the tires for Coca-Cola.
Well, his biggest accounts were the Coca-Cola Company, and I'm not sure that he sold all the tires, but his other big account was called Yancey Brothers, which is the Caterpillar dealer in Atlanta. And I have memories of every Monday morning at 8 o'clock. My daddy was at Yancey Brothers. You don't get service like that nowadays, because he would go over their equipment and check it out and make sure. The Yanceys were very good friends. There was a old Miss, as he called him, old Mr. Yancey, and then I'm not sure that they were even his sons. I think they were his nephews that continued to run the business. Yancey Brothers is still in existence, and it's now 3 huge buildings out near Six Flags. At that time, it was on Northside Drive, and which is now, it's still there, or the building is still there. But he was over there every Monday morning at 8 o'clock to check out and make sure that they were in good shape. But Arthur Montgomery with the Coca-Cola Company was a very good friend, and he did sell them. I always have said that those 2 companies sent me to college. Probably my brother